But I would say that one of the most impressive was this girl named Haley. She literally did 6 different sessions, each 2 hours long. I took a random number generator and I created random numbers like, 5, 6, digits. And then I would come up with an operation between them. I'd, either be multiplying them or dividing them. And then I would ask her to give me all the numbers that are part of the equation.
When you say she would give you all the numbers, this is without seeing the numbers. This is
yes.
Okay.
It was 162 numbers, and she got all but 7 correct. And the 7 mistakes she made, she got on the second try.
Because we're instantly sending and receiving information through space, does that imply that we might be able to perceive or even affect information through time? Have you ever seen or heard of any examples of these children sort of interacting with something that, for a lack of a better word, is non-human?
I've heard accounts that they're evil ones, and then that there are good ones, But I was observing some children who were really advanced in math, and they were autistic. And, I looked over at this one little boy's piece of paper, and I mean, he had drawn the head of, that looks like a gray. I was just like, oh, that's kind of an interesting thing for a little 6-year-old to be drawing.
Have you seen any interest from intelligence agencies when it comes to your work? Welcome back to another episode of Debrief. Today, it is my esteemed pleasure and honor to introduce to you a conversation that I've recently had with Dr. Diane Hennacy Powell. Dr. Powell is a distinguished neuropsychiatrist, neuroscientist, and author renowned for her interdisciplinary research into human consciousness and psychic phenomena. She earned her medical degree from Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, where she also completed a postdoctoral training in medicine, neurology, and psychiatry. She has served on the faculty of Harvard Medical School and participated in a think tank on human consciousness at the Salk Institute in La Jolla, California. Now, throughout her career, Dr. Powell has explored the intersection between neuroscience and psychic phenomena, with a particular focus on telepathy in autistic savants. Her groundbreaking work, known as the Telepathy Project, investigates reports of telepathic communication in nonverbal autistic children, aiming to understand the mechanism behind such abilities. In her book, The ESP Enigma, A Scientific Case for Psychic Phenomena, Dr. Powell presents a comprehensive analysis on various psychic phenomena. But one of the most widely recognized and perhaps most topical contributions to telepathy is her involvement with the absolutely viral sensation of a project known as the Telepathy Tapes. This is a series of recordings that documents remarkable instances of telepathic communication in her research subjects. Now, these tapes have garnered significant attention recently, even so much as reaching a top 5 position on the Spotify charts, with only 10 episodes. It's filled to the brim not only with evidence, a lot of evidence of telepathy, but also with just really interesting human stories about people who, in our society, have been a little bit discarded or suppressed. Through Dr. Powell's work, they've literally given these people a voice. I don't think I remember the last time I gave something such a hard push in real life. Like, everybody I come across, I'm like, you have to listen to the Telepathy Tapes. So do yourself a favor and go check that out. And now it is my pleasure and honor to present to you a conversation between myself and Dr. Diane Hennacy Powell. I am joined today by Dr. Powell, Dr. Diane Hennacy Powell, who has been doing amazing research in the field of Sai for a very long time, namely recently on a very popular podcast that's taken the internet by storm, the Telepathy Tapes. So first of all, thank you, Dr. Powell, for joining me today.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
Dr. Powell, I want to start this interview with a giant disclaimer and propose that our conversation will be based entirely on the statement that Sai exists and it is real. I also want to say that any speculation derived from this statement will be for the sake of thought experiments and encourage lateral thinking. I know that your time is precious, and I don't want to dwell on skepticism too much.
Yes.
So in your book, The ESP Enigma, The Scientific Case for Study for Psychic Phenomena, you provide case studies and real-world examples of psychic phenomena, telepathy, and so on, demonstrated by people with autism, namely like savants. You also demonstrated this during the telepathy tapes. If I had to ask you, what is the most significant discovery that you've come across while working with these kids?
Boy, there's so many. I mean, it's one of those things where it's really unfolded with one ability after another. So, I mean, it starts off with a parent telling me that these kids have savant skills. That, for example, they know things in science that they were never taught, or they have several languages that they can read, or a lot of them are nonverbal, so they can't speak. But I'll hear these things and I'm told that there was no exposure. And that's something that is well documented as savant syndrome, is that you can have people that know things and you don't understand how they know them. And so that I was sort of expecting. But the first thing that happened was the first kind of dominoed fall, if you will, was having parents say to me, and they're all telepathic, by the way, and so I thought, oh, wait a minute, okay, so that's a confounding variable, because if I'm testing this kid to see if he's a mathematical savant and I'm there looking at the calculator to see if his answer is correct, then how do I know he's not just getting the information from me? And I mean, some people would say, oh, well, it's all non-local information. It isn't that interesting. But the scientist in me, the theoretician in me, wants to, if possible, really, define these things, delineate them, to really understand. First, you have to sort of tease everything apart, and then you can see later if they're all the same thing. If I saw the same brain activity common to all of them, I'd say, okay, maybe they are all the same thing. Maybe it all is just navigating space time, but maybe there's something else. And the neuropsychiatrist in me knows that there's this correlation between the EEG and what our inner experience is. So if somebody says they're visualizing something, that you'll see heightened activity in the visual cortex, or if or there's people who say that they're hearing something. I mean, there's a part of the brain, the auditory cortex, that you would expect to have more activity that you can pick up. And so there's this way in which I think, as a neuropsychiatrist, I'm thinking, okay, wouldn't it be validating if you have somebody report, well, this is what's happening for me, and then you see the brain activity is in correspondence with that? And a good example of that is Laura Lynn Jackson, who's a famous psychic who also receives information as a medium. And she reports that the information always comes in her right visual field when it comes from it's either psychic or medium. I oftentimes get my left-right confused. But anyway, but one of them, it is where she sees the information that's psychic, and the other is where she sees the information that is mediumship. And then when you look at her EEG, you'll see that the corresponding sections of the visual cortex to those visual fields actually what show a shift in the usual brain activity. And so that kind of science can help to validate these abilities if you see that. So anyway, but and I'm curious, if somebody is precognitive, which was the next thing, okay, that I first of all, I heard that they were precognitive, and then it's another thing to actually have examples in which it happens, where they say, something's gonna that they're concerned about something, and then it does happen. So, and then I'd say after that, then they start. The next thing to kind of come up is that, oh, by the way, I get visited by, people that are on the other side, and I can get a reading about this relative of yours who's standing over in the corner there. I haven't been able to do, I know how to set up studies so that I could test for mediumship, but at this point, that is really just anecdotal. But what you see is that you just see, if you think about the phenomena that's been described in parapsychology, I think all of them are described by many of these children. It's just that they each have their own sort of specialty, but what they all share in common is definitely the telepathy.
That's fascinating, and that's, I think, one of the biggest takeaways for me, especially listening to the telepathy tapes, is finding out that they all have this, and everybody says this with such confidence, like they all have this, and it's just so mind boggling to me that we can say that they all have this. Like, that is a big piece of data that we have to prove that this ability exists. Like, that is a massive piece of data if they're all doing this. Have you ever found within these, especially the nonverbal community, have you found that there is a correlation between the strength of the telepathy and their condition?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. I mean, one of the things I'd like to do is I'd like to actually, in a formal way, actually test that. I mean, we can easily do that. But what I would say is that one of the reasons why, I mean, obviously, there's no way I've tested on speakers. But one of the reasons, besides the fact that you hear how emphatically somebody who's working as a speech pathologist, has like 5 of these kids in their office every day. Okay. And they say, emphatically, they all, they all do it. That bears a lot of weight for me, because they would be the ones in the front lines telling you, that this is what they're experiencing. Another reason why I think it's possible, quite possible, is that really relates to this theory that I have that came from the fact that the ones who seem to be the most profoundly telepathic are the ones whose receptive language is intact and their expressive language was short-circuited during development. They were developing normally, and then something happens such that the area of their brain that's involved in speech expression gets excessively pruned. Okay, and therefore they have what's basically an expressive aphasia, which a lot of neurologists are familiar with as, oh, somebody has a stroke and they can still understand language, but they just can't express it. And the expression goes for not just using your mouth, but using your fingers as well, because, it's very connected. And that's one of the reasons why babies who are deaf, I mean, they actually can babble with sign. Okay, they're doing all these, just like the baby blah 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 babbling. There's a certain babbling that occurs with the baby with their hand, and if they're deaf, we see that they're using their hand, and we try to form it into symbols and language, but we're so speech oriented that we then start working with them to get their lips to be that which can create a much more rich symbolism, which we call language. And so what you have here is you have this innate desire on the part of this infant to communicate. And when it gets disrupted, then they become really good at what they've got left, because the desire to communicate doesn't go away. And what I think is that I suspect that telepathy, this ability to tap into the consciousness of those that are in our surroundings, that is something that it's innate. We're all born with that. And that ability to do that is a lot of how we then start to make associations between sounds that we're hearing, around us and some kind of meaning. Yeah, it's like it seems so miraculous when you think, well, how did that we didn't always have Sesame Street teaching kids how to, and they're picking up the oral stuff first before we even think about teaching them to read. And if you've ever studied a foreign language, it's like there's a lot to figuring out where one word ends and another word begins, and all of the and the meaning of everything, and not everything's a noun, and so we're and they're somehow picking up all of that. And as I'm saying, what this aha moment that I had was, I was like, okay, if the most profoundly telepathic are the ones who can't, they have no choice. That's the only thing that they have, is they just don't let go of the default means by which they entered into this existence, able to communicate. And what's frustrating for these kids is that people can't read their mind. And so they're experiencing all of this information, and yet until they were actually given the ability to spell, which doesn't require as accurate of a sensory motor system. I mean, a lot of these kids, their proprioception is off, so they don't know exactly where their finger is in space. And a lot of the physical therapy and occupational therapy that they get is trying to, and the spelling activity itself, of pointing to a big letterboard, is precisely to try to help to get them to have enough accuracy. And then once they master it, I mean, then you'll see that they're not hesitating between each letter while they're trying to do the telepathy. They're just going bing, 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 spelling out what it is that, is being thought, and you're like, how is it? I mean, at first I'm like, how is it that they can be spelling what their parent is thinking? And then you realize, if they're tapping into their consciousness, they're not just getting the message, they're also getting the spelling too.
That's right. Yeah. Wow. That is so mind-blowing. It is, I mean, so I have so many questions. Do you think that, because obviously this sounds like you said, like this yearning to express oneself is what's responsible for this. And I would say express oneself as opposed to communicate, because the reception side is like, do we see that in people who have a hard time receiving, that they would receive telepathic messages more, or is it more about expression, like self-expression? Do you think that we're more prone to develop these things if our ways to express ourselves are inhibited versus our ways to intake information?
Well, I agree with you that I think that there's just as much an innate sort of drive for self-expression as there is for communication. But if you think about what's going on with an early child who's totally dependent upon us for everything, it's like they can't open the refrigerator door. They can't,
Right.
they can't, there's so much they can't do unless they learn how to communicate.
So it's survival.
Because a lot of things it's a form of expression to be throwing a tantrum,
Right.
Yeah, I'm sure expressing myself as I'm banging my head against the wall, because I'm so frustrated because I can't communicate with you that this is what I want or need. So I think that, yeah, as we get older, the self-expression becomes, more critical. I mean, and that's,
Right.
I mean, you get into the age of, even starting like the age of, 3, the terrible 2s and 3s, where the kid says no, and anything you say, there's a no, because they're wanting to see that they can, at least, oppose, the program, even though it's really actually what they want to do anyway. I mean, you don't get into struggles with a 3-year-old over that stuff, because they don't really mean no 99% of the time when they say it.
Wow. So, okay, that is super interesting. Yeah, I would. I mean, yeah, it comes down to, I guess, survival, and it reminds me a lot about the work that Dr. Edwin May did with Joe McMoneagle, in that they would have, the targets would be more accurately described if, like, for instance, someone's life was in danger or if it involved children.
Mhm.
So it almost seems
Right.
like it's consciousness's way of wanting itself to survive, and it's doing that by any means necessary and by all means available to it. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, consciousness is, I mean, yeah, the question is, what does it need self-expression? You know, consciousness needs expression,
Yeah.
right? And so what happens is that in the first several years of life, I mean, particularly the first 5 years of life, I mean, the brain is undergoing massive, massive development. And what's driving it is, you know, I mean, these things that we're talking about. And if what happens is, if there's something goes wrong, there's so much plasticity, there's so much flexibility to come up with either a new workaround, you know, or to, you know, some kind of loophole, or, you know, or maintaining a default system that, you know, that worked, but, you know, wasn't perfect, you know, in certain ways, you know, but basically, that consciousness is going to try to fulfill those drives and will work with what it's got, um, during that developmental phase, you know, to make that happen. And so that's why I'm so interested in, you know, like what's the brain wiring of, you know, of some of these individuals who had their, um, you know, had their language disrupted, and then they had these abilities. You know, how did they rewire their brains, and how does that rewiring relate to their specific set of special skills? You know,
Right.
beyond just the telepathy. You know, the savant skills. You know, which are more common in autistics than they are in other population. The other population that they're the most common in is the blind. Both of those are circumstances in which you have something that gets disrupted, something that is usually used by us to navigate to, or to, you know, to get around for survival purposes, and an alternative is you know, is rewired
Enhanced,
into
or
their
yeah.
system. Yeah, enhanced. Yeah, they're even better at that. I mean, like I don't know if you're familiar with like the people who are blind who can echolocate. They can
Yes.
just click, you know, click and then detect the signal bouncing off of things, and they can
Yeah.
do all kinds of things that, you know, a lot of sighted people would be afraid to do.
Exactly. I remember seeing that on, I think it was like Ripley's Believe It or Not or something, like a long time ago. And I remember myself like in my room trying to click and closing my eyes and seeing if I could. And yeah, it felt impossible to me. So it was that much more impressive when when I seen someone do it. Okay. I want to speak about this particular phenomenon that I've heard about through the telepathy tapes, which I think really captivated a lot of people and raised a million questions in my own mind. The talk on the hill. This is this is like this. It really feels like something out of a sci-fi movie or a comic book or something. It is genuinely, I think, for me, one of the most inspiring things that I've heard throughout this project. And to give maybe people a brief summary, and maybe you can help me on this, but it's essentially a place where these mainly, I think, nonverbal communicators go to in a state of sort of meditation and communicate thoughts and ideas and teach each other things. And if I'm not mistaken, there are a lot of them who do this. Is that correct? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair to say. What's interesting is that there's there's been more than one group of individuals who have brought up the hill without before we had the telepathy tapes released. So without it being that they heard about it and then said, "Oh yeah, I go to the hill too." And that's number one. Number two is the fact that there's more than one hill, and one person put it that there's hills for different ages, kind of almost like how, you know, high school, you've got, junior high,
Wow.
high school, that there's different general age groups. And that makes sense. I mean, socially, birds of a feather flock together. So, if you were to open up a big playground and you had, 5-year-olds and 9-year-olds and 15-year-olds, they're going to self-assort by age. And then another thing that's interesting is that more than one child has described it as having a library. And, and that makes a lot of people then think about, oh, is that the Akashic
Right.
Records or,
Live,
what
yeah,
is
of
that?
Alexandria.
And well, yeah, yeah, yeah. And, and they're sort of like, that's, they're studying,
Wow.
and a lot of this is occurring while they're sleeping and dreaming sleep, which we know dreaming sleep is more closely associated with psychic abilities than a lot of other states. Um, And but some of them can, also, I guess, during the day they can, just kind of go up to the bedroom and shut the door and kind of go to the hill and visit their friends. But they need to be in a safe place like their bed to do it. They're not just walking around, going to the hill. I mean, it's my understanding.
So, is there a specific example of some like verifiable case that has happened? So, for instance, like someone went to go learn something and they came back with more knowledge than they had prior to going to the hill. Like, has there been any form of like telepathic communication between two individuals that was later confirmed, even though they didn't meet each other and know of each other, that they confirmed each other's existence? Has there been any examples of that?
I've been told that has happened. Yeah, I mean, I haven't been able to, personally, witness it. Do the controlled experiments that I'd like to do, but yes, I've been told that definitely that there are these. There are friendships. I mean, so there are certain kids that have more of an affinity, for another kid, so it's not that they're just going to the hill and getting, and talking with everybody, it's that they have someone specifically more that they want to see on the hill. So there's that kind of thing going on. And that, so that telepathy between two people, whether it's happening on the hill or whatever, I mean, that's, harder to say, but, it's impressive if there really is, telepathy happening between them, which is, there's no reason to, I mean, discount the people who were reporting that.
Sure.
And, um, but, there's, there's just so much about this that, they're interconnected with one another. There's just so much about this that, just needs to be explored. And so that's one of the ones I wanna set up. I mean, the experiment that I wanna set up for the documentary is I want it to make, I mean, I'm gonna be doing other experiments, but I want it for the documentary, um, I wanna have the best possible demonstration of this, phenomena possible. And to me, at this point, I think one of the best demonstrations would be to have, two kids, totally separate individuals, being, where, you know, two different states, across the country, whatever, but they're totally apart from one another. They're each working with their best facilitator for their communication, but that's not the person who's holding the thoughts about, that the kid's supposed to read. It's let's see the two kids and communicate with one another and see what happens. And so that's an experiment I really want to set up, among
Yeah,
others.
I mean, that sounds exciting. And I'm sure everybody would be very excited to see something like that happen. You know, it's so interesting how we're kind of sort of casually strolling by the idea that these kids are reading their parents' minds. It's such a like a post psychic disclosure world that I feel like we're living in right now. And I didn't even get to revel in like this psychic phenomenon yet. So I freak out from time to time just even thinking about this, like internally, and it makes me very excited. But Could you perhaps, just for the audience that maybe isn't familiar, give one example of some type of test, of the many, many tests that were performed, one example, and of the sort of variables that were controlled during this test, and what the outcome was?
Sure. I mean, the child actually that I spent the most time, some of the children that I spent the most time studying actually aren't even part of the telepathy tapes. Those children that are in that are ones that Kai wanted to. She wanted to be there from the very beginning. You know that she didn't want to see somebody had already tested. But I would say that one of the most impressive was this girl named Haley, who was somebody that she literally she literally did 6 different sessions, each 2 hours long, with 2 separate therapists, where we had a barrier between them, a visual barrier between her and the therapist. And she loved numbers. And so, and she didn't like it to be just, simple numbers. And so what I would do is I took a random number generator and I created random numbers like, 5, 6, digits, different, anything between, you know, 0 and, 10 million kind of thing. And then whatever numbers came up. And then I would come up with an operation between them. I'd, either be multiplying them or dividing them or finding a cube root or whatever with those numbers. And then I would ask her to give me all the numbers that are part of the equation. Okay, so what is the equation in the first place? And then she'd point to all the
Telepathically.
numbers, and what is the operation?
When you say
Huh?
she would give you all the numbers, this is without seeing the numbers. This is completely across the room.
Yes, yes,
Wow.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. With the therapist would be thinking of, the therapist would be looking at the mathematical equation I gave her, and let's say, it was 1574 times 302. Okay. And so she would say those 2 numbers. She would also choose that it was times, because she had the
Wow.
on her stencil board, she had, the thing for those kinds of operations. And then I'd say, and what does that, and the therapist said, what does that equal? And then she would give you the correct answer. And um, and so if you add up, if you just treat all of those individual digits, both of the numbers that were part of the um, the mathematical operation and the numbers that were the answer, um, I tested her for, it was 162, it was 162 numbers, and she got all but 7 correct, and the 7 mistakes she made, she got on the second try. All in a row. All in a matter of, gosh, 15 minutes maybe. I mean,
Wow.
yeah. And so that gives you, because she's not there trying to pick up some kind of subtle cue, or
No.
she's just
Instantly.
going at it like, okay.
Is it this is fascinating. I mean, it does look like it is instant communication, by the way. There's no bandwidth. And that is something, as I'm a magician. I've pretended to have these psychic abilities, and I'm pretty sure I could convince someone that I have psychic abilities because I've been doing it for so long, right? There is a moral and ethical line that I do that I do respect, but for me, it's always about dramatically playing up the idea that, oh, you're thinking I'm getting a 2, but these children are doing it instantly. There's no hesitation.
Yep.
And so that brings me to the next question, because when perceiving or sort of communicating information non-locally through remote viewing or through telepathy, like, because we're instantly sending and receiving information through space, does that imply that we might be able to perceive or even affect information through time?
Yeah. I mean, I look at both quantum physics and the theory of relativity. The theory of relativity tells us that our concept of time is an illusion. It's not just moving like an arrow does in a single direction. And so I think a lot of these parapsychological phenomena, what they tell us is exactly what physicists were telling us 100 years ago. And that is that we're locked into our sensory system has kind of fooled us into just thinking that reality is just three physical dimensions and a very limited, view of what time is. And so we know that space-time itself curves, and it curves as a result of something called gravity. We don't understand, we don't understand gravity entirely by any stretch of the imagination, but we do know that was, Einstein's, description of gravity, and it really, it holds up. Um, yeah, and so, similarly, we know from quantum physics that you have certain conservation laws that if you have two particles that were associated with one another, they say two electrons, and one has a spin that goes up and the other has a spin that goes down, that no matter how far apart they are, if you switch the spin on one of them to the opposite direction, that other particle has to instantaneously switch as well,
Yeah.
because they're really still connected. I mean, that's what it's telling us, and I think they're still connected via other dimensions.
Like a
That's
field.
I think. I think that the spookiness of entanglement goes away once you realize that things that we think are separate
Right.
in this very limited view of reality, they're really not separate.
I see.
Similarly, things that are, we think of as being solid, we know are not solid based on how much space there is in an atom.
Yeah. I mean, that's, there's, I think it was Einstein that said the only reason we have time is so that everything doesn't happen all at once.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really what that is it's a mental construct
Yeah.
that
It's a human
so
interface.
yeah, exactly. And so that's so much of what we're talking about here is, is the human interface. I mean, that's what drew me to neuropsychiatry, because what it did was it put me in a position where I could have knowledge of the brain and at the same time spend hours talking with people who would describe what their reality was to me, what their experience actually was. I mean, talking with people who are diagnosed as schizophrenic is like talking to somebody who's currently in a dream.
Wow.
But the difference is that it's a dream they totally believe.
Right. Yeah. Why wouldn't they?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and so then the funny thing is that when you see these people that come in your office that are diagnosed schizophrenic, and they come in with proof of their reality, and you're like,
Wow.
okay.
Wow.
You have to think about, well, what does that say? Is that, is it that we're labeling people as having schizophrenia or psychosis who just happen to, for whatever reason, be um, having these experiences more, but it's not that their reality is any less real than our reality. I mean, is that
Yeah.
what that says? I mean, it's these are the kind of questions that I think that we need to, to ask ourselves. But at the same time, there's some realities people could be living in that don't have good survival value.
Right.
And so then, it's fine if they're, a shaman in a cave, or somebody who's a guru, on a mountain, having everybody take care of all your basic needs so that you can be spending that much time in an alternative reality that might contain information for us that's valuable. which is a lot of indigenous cultures, they valued these kinds of people. What we did was we just automatically label everybody as insane who reports those experiences. And
Yeah.
so I think that that there can be survival value in not ever having those experiences, okay? Because you can always be on task. So where you run into some problems is when people are a blend, where they have those experiences, and yet they're, in order to have any kind of life in our society, we also expect them to be operating from a more embodied perspective than they're capable of.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the, I think, more tragic sides of this phenomenon as well, is that they're, these individuals are so gifted and we have so much to learn from them. But, I think with the help of people like yourselves and people like Kai and this documentary and your work, I think we'll be able to shed some light on their value as human beings in our society. Because I think for just a long time, this really, really made me very sad, was looking at how these individuals have been treated, not only in other countries, but in even the United States, North America, historically. And it hasn't been, it hasn't been too good.
It's been appalling. It's been
Yeah,
appalling. I mean,
yeah,
that, people were using shock collars on these kids. They would do adversive behavioral stuff when these kids were in institutions. And that is a practice that, I mean, I don't think it ended that long ago. I mean, it certainly was still being done during the course of my career.
yeah. I mean, other countries have been known, there's been, people have been euthanized for these things, and it's just an absolute tragedy. So, like, first of all, like, I mean, it's so good that you're doing this, and I'm so glad to be able to help spread this message because it deserves the attention. Okay, I do want to ask about something since we're playing thought experiments here. I'm someone who definitely believes in non-human intelligence, and I wanted to ask, because you touched on this a little bit at the beginning of the conversation, but have you ever seen or heard of any examples of these children sort of interacting with something that, for a lack of a better word, is non-human?
Um, well, so I haven't personally witnessed it myself. I've heard accounts, and um, I've heard accounts that they're evil ones, and then that there are good ones, but they're putting it in terms of, entities, which, who knows,
Yep.
what they are. Um, and I remember once I was actually somewhere, but I was observing some children who were really advanced in math, and they were in this math club, and they were autistic, and I looked over at this one little boy's piece of paper, and I mean, he had drawn the head of, that looks like a gray, with those those classic eyes, and I was just like, oh, that's kind of an interesting thing for a little 6-year-old to be drawing,
Wow.
you know. So I mean, that's the kind of evidence that this is a possibility that I've seen, and it's the kind of thing that um, I mean, obviously, we're going to be wanting to know, what is it that these children are experiencing. We also want to know, how can we support them best, because a lot of their experiences are quite frightening for them. I mean, I just, in the last couple of days, I mean, I've had a couple of parents who've contacted me because they're desperate, because they don't know what to do for their child, because their child has had precognitions that have come true that were not good, and they're having precognitions of things that aren't good. And so,
Wow.
but the problem is they don't, it's like, is that going to happen tomorrow? Is it going to happen a month from now? I mean,
Or at all,
what do you
or
do?
yeah.
You can't lock your father up, or your sister, put her on house arrest because you're afraid she's going to go out the door and something's going to happen to her. And it's like, so there's there's a lot of different aspects to all of this
Yeah.
that with my background is both a scientist and as a clinician and a a compassionate human being. I want to see I want to see so much manifest to so that we have the appropriate kind of support for these individuals, whether we're talking about their education or we're talking about their emotional support. Because it's if you think about it, I mean, how would you behave if you experience the world that they do?
Yeah. I wouldn't even, I can't even imagine what it is that they're experiencing. And that's just it. That's I think part of my fascination with it too, is that I want to understand, because I think there is value there, and there is, something to appreciate on a human level, from our existence. There's so much to learn, in a world. I mean, we're at a place in the world where we're the most disenchanted we've ever been. And this for me provides real magic. This is, it's just, it's given me a lot to look forward to, a lot to be hopeful for our species as well. And I think, I think I agree with you. I think, yeah, more eyes, the better, the more work, the better, the more help, the better. But yeah, I can't imagine what all of those things must be like. And when you touched on precognition there, it reminds me, I interviewed Graham Nichols. Not sure if you're familiar with Graham Nichols. He does a lot of out of body experience work, and he's worked with Dean Radin and Rupert Sheldrake, and he had a verifiable precognition that happened as well during an out of body experience. He was surrounded by multiple people, 5 of his friends, and they wrote down, he said there was going to be this explosion on this street in London, in Soho. He doesn't know when, but he's like, he felt like he saw the explosion, and 5 days later it occurred exactly where he had said. And, when I heard something like that, it begs the question, like, is that something you can alter? Is there a reason you're getting this? Is it because I don't think he would have been there. So what was really the point of it? And like, so, I mean, there's, like you said, so many questions, so much to discover, so much to learn from. And for someone like you to be in every single one of those directions, I mean, that's a lot of responsibility. That's a lot of work.
Yeah, believe me.
Um,
Yeah, but to your point, I just want to make the comment that I became really fascinated by this work by Phyllis Atwater, and she wrote a book called Future Memory. And the way that I talk about this in my book, the ESP thing, and the way that she describes future memory, it sounds like it's like she gets a glimpse into the future, and it just plays like a movie, and then it collapses down, and she gets these visual shifts and different things before it happens. And it's like she sees a movie, then it shuts down, and then sometime in the future that moment arrives, and she can, like, if she knows exactly what somebody's going to say, that she
wow.
knows exactly what's going to happen next. It literally is like having had the movie from the future. And this is that idea of the block universe where the past, present, and past all coexist. It really is like you've seen something from the future that it's so vivid. And then the question comes up when you realize, I've been here before, can you alter the course of events? And what she tells in her book is that sometimes you can and sometimes you can't. Sometimes you're in a situation where you can actually act on this recognition. Oh, this is where the bus is going to hit that lady walking across the street, and you can grab the lady's arm. Or some things just seem to be part of, whether it's a soul contract or whatever it is, some things seem to that you can't prevent them. It's like it's in the hard wiring, and and so I think that a lot of life is like that. That we have free will, and yet at the same time, there's a lot of things that are already part of the script of why we're here, and it can be hard to discern what's what. But I encourage people to not think that it's all just locked in stone, and it's like, okay, I saw that into the future, and that means it has to happen, because I think that it maybe it's part of why we get warnings.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point, and it would be like sort of us warning ourselves in the past, but like, it's I read this book by Dr. Michael Newton, The Journey of Souls, and I read a few of his books, and he mentions as well, because you mentioned soul contract, and he does mention something like that as well, where when these souls are choosing their incarnation or whatever it is, that they scrub through their lives, and the further forward they go, the sort of blurrier it gets, because of the amount of variables are just sort of increasing the further away you get. So it's almost like it's a probability factor, but free will can still sort of impose itself to a certain extent in the future. No,
Hmm.
you can see the past probably with a lot more clarity than you could the future.
Hmm.
Okay. Has any of the people you've worked with demonstrated any ability of PK or telekinesis? Have you ever seen any of that in person, or have you ever heard of, maybe anecdotally, of someone doing something like that? Because I know they did some tests in the '80s in China and in Tibet with these children, but that's so far away, and it's in a time where it's kind of nebulous. Have you ever seen any evidence of that?
Well, okay, so I haven't seen it in person, but what I have seen is there are at least two or three different individuals who are not children; they're adults, but they're on the spectrum, who have who contacted me a long time ago, and they have sent me multiple videos of them doing things that would be considered PK.
Oh,
So for example, uh, having like pinwheels where you have like, maybe three or four different layers of different pinwheels, okay, and being able to move some of them this way and others that way,
wow.
through, just making a hand motion like this, and then you'll see, and the fact that what's important about it being multiple pinwheels is that, if it was just, oh, there's a fan behind her that I can't see, it's like, but if you've got multiple pinwheels, obviously they should be going in the same direction, if they're
Yeah.
getting hit by something like that. So, um, and then, another form that I've seen in videos again, is somebody being outside and pointing to the sky, and having the cloud disperse.
Yeah, cloud bursting. Yeah,
Hmm.
I've seen that on video as well. Yeah, these are, I mean, just more examples of amazing things that are left to be discovered and studied and tested. It's quite exciting, because it does, just the fact that this exists, that this psi ability exists. I mean, it opens up an immense floodgate, and I think to that effect, that's probably, the reason why there's such a big pushback, is that this completely shifts the idea of materialist science into an entirely new era of undiscovered, uncharted territory. And that can be daunting. It can be shocking ontologically. It can be all of those things. But what better time than now? I think we might as well go for it.
I 100%. I mean, 100%. I mean, I think we're overdue for a paradigm shift, really. And I think that my work is just, the thing that's just kind of potentially push it over,
Yeah.
but it's been there waiting to be.
tipped over.
Yeah,
Um,
but what's interesting is it's almost like the iceberg effect, where the iceberg, the what the part of the iceberg you don't see underwater is melting. Okay, so you can be in a Kodiak, right near this iceberg, and then all of a sudden the thing decides to flip on you. That's a big thing to flip. It's
yeah.
not like a slow little thing like this. It just goes, flip, and overnight, totally different.
Yeah, I expect something like that to happen very soon. I'll end with one final question here, and feel free to answer this in any way you see fit. But I had to ask: have you seen any interest from intelligence agencies when it comes to your work, especially in this particular field?
Well, first of all, I've always been self-funding, and so I've never taken any money from any of the three-letter agencies. And but the reality is, I've been too public about this work in scientific conferences where I know there's a high intelligence. I mean, just by definition, okay? I mean, if you go to a parapsychological association, you tell me you don't think there's anybody that, reports back to intelligence and what they learned. I mean, I'd be naive to think that that wasn't the case. So, yeah, I think that they're interested in my work. I mean, but I haven't had anybody, come to me and, offer me a position like that. I mean, I've
Okay.
been working. Yeah, I've been wanting to. One of the things, I have somebody who's interested in funding my research, who says that one of the things that's the problem with being funded by the three-letter agencies is that things remain classified and you have no control over it. And so he wants to see private investors step up to the plate to fund research that then becomes the public's property. It's kind of because that's been part of the problem, is that, a lot of this stuff a lot of the stuff still remains classified.
Still secret. Yeah.
And so, but the reality is that public perception has not diminished in terms of its belief of this. If anything, it's grown.
It's increased. Yeah. Do you ever feel sort of apprehensive about these agencies approaching these children, perhaps, like in the future? Because as someone who follows a lot of this stuff, and I've looked at all the Stargate stuff and all the Grill Flame, and it goes back, and the MK Ultra and all these things. But like, are you ever like weary of that fact or cognizant of that fact that like, they might be approached one day? Because I feel like that would be of great interest to a lot of these agencies.
Well, I mean, one of the things I'd say is that none of us we're very protective of these children. None of us want to see them get exploited. We really don't. What we want is for them to have opportunities to get an education and make the contributions they want to in the world. And rather turning them into, psychic spies or this or that, what they want to do is help solve a lot of the big questions that we have that have to do with saving the planet, and they're very interested in making the world a better place. And I think that that's a beautiful mission that we need to protect as much as we're protecting them.
Well said. Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to end it. It completely sort of exemplifies their mission statement and who they are. I think, you look at these children and even these adults, and the one thing you can tell for sure is that they're all pure of heart. And I think that is the biggest gift that they have, is showing us that amount of compassion, not only for each other, but for this earth. So a beautiful message. Thank you so much, Dr. Powell. You've been just an absolute delight. I enjoyed picking your brain, so thank you for letting me do that.
You're very welcome. Okay, thank you.
So there you have it, folks. That is my interview with Dr. Diane Hennacy Powell on telepathy and her work therein. Just a fascinating human being, and honestly, I commend her for her work, because it has to be so challenging to not only get past the hurdles of communication with a lot of these people, but just even hearing their stories. Listening to the telepathy tapes was such an emotional roller coaster for myself that I couldn't imagine being subjected to that on a daily basis. It definitely takes a strong person to, be exposed to this type of stuff on a daily basis. Folks, I would love to hear your thoughts on all of this. What in this interview was the most interesting thing that you took away from this? Please comment below. If you guys want to see more content from Area 52, more episodes of Debriefed, more uncut interviews, more extra vlogs, and all the other amazing things that we have to offer, check out our Patreon or our memberships. You can join by clicking the join button below, or head over to patreon.com/Area52Investigations. You'll be brought into a secret little club on our Discord where we have movie nights, book clubs, discussions, future investigations, and so much more. I'm really, really, really grateful for all of your support. I couldn't be here without you, so thank you so much for making this possible. Oh, by the way, this is because of you. Thank you for 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. This made my day. You guys are awesome. I appreciate you so much. Couldn't have done this without you. This is my acceptance speech, by the way. I didn't practice. I didn't write anything down. Yeah. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Happy holidays, everybody. Merry Christmas and all that stuff. And we'll see you on the next video. Peace.